Hey folks, welcome back to Only Best Fancy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about Strange New World, which is a great conclusion to what's been a wonderful series. Vivian Shaw returns to this trilogy, now a quartet, to deliver one last punch, which lets us examine the repercussions of everything that's happened so far. And to close the door on this series, finally, behind her in the best way possible. So, what is this book about? Well, it picks up a few months after or a little while I should say, after the end of the third book. And now that the accords are in place, heaven and hell must find a way to basically meet the terms of the contract. And they especially the parts that require collaboration between them, even when the clinical evidence points to the fact that this is a very bad idea. Like demons being in heaven and angels being in hell, it just doesn't work. So, as a result of that, the only real way they could meet that particular clause in the contract is for them to see if that the collaboration is possible on Earth, and that's kind of that's kind of the basis for this book, which is how Dr. Greta Helsing gets involved in leading a research trip that has an angel and a demon as part of the crew, and that's the point of and that's it. Like they're going to do this research trip, but it's really a political thing between heaven and hell. So that's the setup. But then a series of mysterious attacks begins to happen, and it immediately puts the trip in jeopardy. And yeah, that's pretty much what goes on in this book. The basic idea behind this book, but it does so much more, and we'll get into that in a bit. I do want to talk about this series as a whole initially. One of the best bit of book news I got recently, actually, before was when Vivian Shaw announced that she was returning to this series one last time, because she proved that my joy was well founded. Like I really enjoyed this book. It you know the end of the third book was climactic. It was very much a wrap up to the series. So it makes you wonder, how is she possibly going to top that with this book? And the answer is that she doesn't. Instead, she gives us a book that examines the repercussions of that book. And I love that. I love the fact that we get, for when this climactic stuff happens in epic fantasy, we get to look at the repercussions, the consequences of these things. And that's very much what this book primarily is. So, quick background, if you've never heard of this series before, it's a series, like when it was initially published, the buzzwords around it would have been like fantasy of manners. So it would be like this very kind of dialogue driven, dramatic kind of story. Like if it were to be published today, I would not be surprised to see it pitched as cozy fantasy, because it does have that vibe. Dr. Greta Helsing is a descendant of that Helsing of Dracula infamy, and in this world she's a physician who deals with monsters. She's a physician to monsters, basically, which is quite a departure from her ancestor that we met. Anyway, and the cool thing about this series is that it draws very heavily on classic like horror literature. So the primary cast is largely vampires, and these are vampires drawn from classic literature. So not just Dracula, like ignore Dracula. We're talking of vampires like Varney the Vampire, that kind of thing, Lord Ruthven, and these kind of characters who you probably never read anything by. I certainly didn't before this, but she incorporates them into the story, and she does it in a way that harkens back to their origins. So they very much have this kind of aristocratic feel to them, but they've been updated to give them a bit more of a modern to function in the modern world, essentially. So yeah, that's kind of what this whole thing is about. And what can I say? What can I say? Like this is very much a book written a couple of years after a trilogy, and you can tell because she doesn't try to outdo what's come before. She instead examines the repercussions, like I said, and we did leave things at a pretty in a pretty explosive way. So this book deals with like how is it possible for heaven and hell to even collaborate? Like what are the consequences of that for each society? What are the consequences for each culture, each way of life? What are the consequences for Earth? What are the personal consequences of these beings who reside in each realm? Will it? Is it something they can? Is it something they're open to? Is it something that can lead to a crisis of faith because it's such a fundamental shift in what's in practically what's at the core of their being, at the core of their mythology. It's such a fundamental shift. So like the book, it deals with all of these things in a pretty heavy way, and it does couch it in around the elements of this subplot that goes on with these attacks and these practically terrorist attacks that occur over the course of the book. It basically does what, like, if you've ever listened to my review of Sword of Kaigen, it basically does exactly what that book did with its third act, where you have the whole big climax happen early in the book or the series, and you get to examine what that meant for this world. That's what this book is about, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that tremendously. One thing I did want to mention about this book is that it feels very weirdly paced, because it takes a while for us to kind of get the whole setup and backstory of this. Then the research trip starts to happen, and then things just go haywire from there. And in addition to that, as much as Greta is very much the main character of this series, she's also a minor character in these events, and because of that, she's not always included in key events that have to be portrayed. So because of that, it can kind of feel weirdly plotted, weirdly paced. But maybe that's just a me thing. I think honestly that's something that may be a bit more prevalent in Cozy Fantasy, because I recall something similar happening with Julie Long's Tale of Small Fortunes, where when there's the smaller stuff, like the more day-to-day stuff that's relevant to the character, she's very much there, she's very much present, she very much has her own agency and stuff, and it's the same here. But when it gets more into like the more grander side of events and that kind of thing, because of the fact that they play such a smaller role, all of that, it either happens off screen or it happens without them taking part in it, essentially. And it can be a little weird to read, but it's not like a bad thing or anything. It very much fits the logic of the world. So it is what it is. And what's cool about all of this is that she does all of this in a relatively short page count. I think I read this book out in like 2 sittings. And yeah, like it was fun, it was engaging. I was very happy to be back in this world, because honestly, when I heard it was being wrapped up as a trilogy, I was a bit disappointed because I wanted more. And yeah, I was happy when I heard about this other book. But then we get to the ending, and I love the ending of this. I wish I could talk about it, because I obviously I can't do that because of spoilers, but just the way that she couches that ending, the phrasing that she uses, and so I love the way she wrapped it up. And she very definitively closes the door on the series this time. But she does leave a tiny bit of light peeking through. And or maybe that's just me projecting and hoping. But you know, like I was personally disappointed when the series wrapped up as a trilogy. And here I am talking about the 4th book. So who's to say this is the last we've seen of Dr. Greta Helsing. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Strange New World. For me, it's a great bookend to the series. If it is the last book that we get, it is a very it is a very consequential book. It's not like one that it could be argued it's one that we could have done without, but at the same time, it's one I'm very happy we got, and it's one that very much adds to the series in the best way possible. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Strange New World. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.